And
Well, hello,
test your mic.
General, you're tested. You're live too. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kevin Barron. I'm the executive editor of Defense One. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first event in our month-long State of Defense series, State of the Army. This series is the first live extension of our annual State of Defense special report, which previews the year ahead. Usually that comes out around the State of the Union speech, but with the COVID year that we're having, we're re-upping it at the end of the summer before the push to the fall to talk about the future of all of the service branches. So later in the month, you'll have State of Air Force, Marines, Navy, Space Force as well. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items for folks watching at home or wherever you are. To the right of your screen, you'll find a chat box. You should see that. That's where you can ask your questions to General McConville, as well as chat and interact with other attendees. We'll be fielding some of those questions toward the end of the interview, but you're encouraged to go ahead and submit them along the way at any time, and they will be fielded to me, and I will ask them on your behalf. That's our technology today. And for everyone, you can also ask for technical assistance if you need. The event is being recorded, you should all know, and will be available on demand shortly afterward for you to share with your colleagues. And with that, allow me to introduce the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, General James McConville. General, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fine, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Great, great. So we're going to go through a lot of issues, I hope, in the next 45 minutes. And from some of the news of the day, the summer that we're having, the crazy year we're having, and then I think some more traditional, literally around the globe kind of issues. You know, we've come off quite the interesting call of the summer of COVID, protests, racial tensions. But in just the last week, the military has really been in the news like not like in an unusual way. And you have the great fortune of the timing of showing up on Tuesday morning after Labor Day to talk about some of these issues with us, a lot of which I know is politics, and it's the last thing a general usually wants to get involved in or the military wants to get involved in. But from my sense as a reporter, a lot of these issues reflect how the American people and how American leaders are talking about the military, thinking about the military, and they're a bit of a snapshot of maybe civ-mil relations at the moment. So in the last week, Stars and Stripes is in the news. President's comments in the past have come up in the news. And now, as of yesterday, I'm going to read a quote to you, and I want to get a little bit of reaction of what we've heard. Trump said about the military, "I'm not saying the military is in love with me. The soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably aren't because they want they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all those wonderful companies that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy." Now, that's what Trump said. Other Democrats have said very similar statements. And in fact, Senator Warren in 2018, I've reported on this, said, quote, "We can start by ending the stranglehold of defense contractors on our military policy. It's clear that the Pentagon is captured by the so-called Big Five defense contractors, and taxpayers are picking up the bill." So, General McConville, just a broad question for you. Are these accurate depictions of how the military works?
Well, you know, I'm not going to comment on really the president's comments or really any of the politicians' comments. You know, one of the things that we want to do as a military is, you know, we live in a political environment, but we're an apolitical organization. And I think it really must remain that way, you know, especially with an election coming up.
Do you sense from the broad discussion of the military in such a sense that, you know, it's in the campaigns right now, it's in the news, this idea that the military is beholden to defense contractors? Is that even an accurate statement?
Well, you know, again, when I take a look at, you know, the senior leaders in the United States military, when I'm talking about generals, I'm talking admirals, I'm talking sergeant majors. You know, many of these leaders have sons and daughters that serve in the military. Many of these leaders have sons and daughters who've gone to combat or may be in combat right now. So, you know, I can assure the American people that the senior leaders would only recommend sending our troops to combat when it's required for national security and in the last resort. We take this very, very seriously in how we make our recommendations. And I think that's all I can really say on that. I feel strongly about that.
Well, to me, it's the president's comment yesterday. It's not an isolated thing. It's part of this whole summer that we were talking about. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was how the military was portrayed and has been received in their participation or involvement at all in the protests over the summer. You've addressed some of this already. And I noticed, in my head, what I'm thinking is, the National Guard was called in to help, supplement law enforcement, do their job that they're doing. And, depending on what you thought of what was going on, either you hated it or you loved it, but it brought that, it brought the idea of the military in American cities, to light in a way we haven't thought about. Today, I'm turning on the news and seeing, heroic images and reporting about the National Guard in California fires. Same National Guard, same organization, same people. What are your thoughts of how the American reception of the military today?
Well, I think the job of the American military is to protect the nation, not to police the nation. That's why we have police officers. That's why we have law enforcement. And if we're going to commit troops, I've seen the images of what the California National Guard's been doing out there in the fires, rescuing people. If you've seen had a chance like I have to go into New York City to the Javits Center and some of the hospitals and see, when military came in there, both active guard and reserve, and saved the American people. We have field hospitals right now in Texas, and both active and reserve. We have troops fighting forest fires. We have troops assisting with hurricanes, and I think that's what the American people want us to do. Now, when situations get to the point where no longer local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and then the governors can make a decision on whether they want to employ their National Guard in a support role. And as far as for the regular Army troops, to me, that is a last resort. And my best military advice is only in the most extreme conditions should that be considered.
I looked up the statement that you and Secretary McCarthy made. I think it was back in June, kind of at the height of the protests. And I just wanted to kind of get an update from you on, at least from the Army perspective, so that others watching know. Part of the statement said, quote, "Our ability to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic," part of the oath, "is founded on a sacred trust with the American people. Racial division erodes that trust." And it goes on to say, "The Army has sometimes fallen short, but because just as we reflect the best of America, we reflect its imperfections. We need to work harder to earn the trust of the mothers and fathers, as you said earlier, who hesitate to hand their sons and daughters into our care. How we respond to the anger that has ignited will chart the course of that trust." Give us an update. What has the Army done, or more interesting for us, what will it do in the future to win that trust? Do you mean win it back, or do you mean more continue?
Well, I think we should wake up every day and realize, we should never take for granted the trust of the American people, mothers and daughters. We are not a perfect organization, although we strive to be. Some argue that we're the most respected institution in the country. We need to work hard to do that. And when we have issues, whether it's racism or anything else that divides our country and also our military, it's something that we should take immediate action on. So what are we doing? We have a Project Inclusion. We're doing things inside our whole new talent management project to make sure that not only do we represent the diversity of the country, but at the highest levels, we see inclusion, we see belonging. And that is something that we are working aggressively to get after. We've done some things like taking photos out our promotion boards just to make sure there's no unconscious bias. The Secretary of Defense came out with a policy that only allows certain types of symbols to be used as far as flags. But more importantly, as I talk to our soldiers, it's a recognition in spending time to find out who they are. What's their perspective? Where did you come from? The Army's always been on the leading edge of integration and getting after those type of policies, and we need to continue to do that. The Army is a great place because it provides purpose to be part of something bigger than yourself. It's a great team, but more importantly, for a lot of our minorities out there, it's an escalator to the middle class, and we have to strive to do that, and we have to make sure that we continue to work those, to provide those opportunities for everyone in America.
Well, I want to ask you a couple policy changes that were, either happening or going to happen this summer related to this. One was changing Confederate base names and the Army on Army bases, and the other was the Confederate flag. And as our viewers may know or need reminding, there was a plan to change, or there have been reports of plans to change the base name, but the president has said he doesn't want to do it, not on his term. But with the flag rule, the Army found, or the Pentagon found, not just the Army, for kind of creative way to say, well, actually, we're going to list out the only flags that folks can fly on bases now or display, and just not list the Confederate flag. And since then, there's been some pushback that, well, it also doesn't list things like the pride flag, if you wanted to fly that, or the Red Sox flag, if you wanted to fly that, which, maybe you do. I don't know. Are there a couple of things? First on the flag rule, are there any plans to adjust it in the works? Is the Pentagon receptive to these criticisms of, it went a little too far, maybe we can adjust it?
Well, I think I won't speak for the Secretary of Defense, but what we want to do is take a look at where the policy could be adjusted. We always take a look at our policies, and we put out guidance, and that's a question of, hey, we didn't have this flag. Was that the intent of what we try to do? And I think that discussion is ongoing.
Let me ask, is this like a conversation and a worry that's only reporters in Washington are caring about, or are you hearing about this from actual soldiers and their families?
No, we have heard from some soldiers and from some families about the concern about what flags fall into the policy. But the intent, at least within the Army that I can speak of, we want to make sure that everyone feels included and everyone belongs. And at least from where I sit, I give best military advice on a lot of these type issues. Some of these are political decisions, some are being discussed in Congress. But we're looking for things that are going to bring people together long term. What's the best way to bring the force together to make everyone feel like they're an integral part of the team? And from where I sit as a chief of staff, having a cohesive team at every single level is really almost the secret sauce for the United States Army. That's what makes us different.
Okay, and then last on this, I'll ask you the same kind of question about the Confederate base naming issue. Is this something that, what are you hearing from actual soldiers and families about this? Or is it a big issue they're worried about? Is it not so much? This is something in the press. Is this a Beltway whisper topic, or is it real?
Well, I think for, depending on your perspective, depending on the soldiers, for some soldiers that I've talked to, it's a very emotional issue. For other soldiers, they're not even realize the names of the people on the bases they're at. So I think we have to take a look. But, at the end of the day, what we want to do, at least as the leadership in the Army, is to identify those things that, may divide us, and take a look at and come up with solutions they're going to bring us together, to bring everyone together, and really to make us more of a cohesive team.
All of these, I asked earlier about what Americans think, and I was going to ask if you think Americans understand the military. You kind of already covered that, but this is a transition moment for the military that you've talked about. I think you said every 40 years, the Army especially goes through a new transformation, and this is it. And I was thinking about your bio. It's interesting. You're almost a personification of it. Your combat experience, your field experience was in the Middle East, in the Iraq wars. I read General Milley's statement, I think, on your nomination, saying that in Fallujah, well, he was on the ground, you were in the air. What were you flying in the air?
Well, I was flying. He likes to tell the story how we saved his life. We were flying Apaches. We like to tell the story. We didn't know it was him. No, I'm just kidding. But he, but I, General Milley and I have served together in combat, for about 39 months together. Once in Iraq, and then in the 101st Airborne Division in Afghanistan, and then in Afghanistan again when he was the Corps commander and I was commanding the 101st Airborne Division. So he and I have spent a lot of time together over the last 15 to 18 years, and he's a great combat leader. There's no one that is braver or more courageous in combat. And on that day, on the west side of Baghdad, it was no different than any other day. He was out there with his troops, leading his troops. He got kind of blown up in an IED, a small one, and there was an ambush, and we just happened to be available in attack helicopters to provide the support he needed. It was not a big deal. It was nothing heroic. We did that every single day, supporting the troops on the ground. But about the transformation that you asked the question on, every 40 years, I believe the Army needs to transform. If you look at history, 1940, right before World War II, as it was starting, a guy named Marshall, one of the world's greatest generals, and certainly the Army's greatest generals, was sitting in my seat as the chief of staff. And those leaders at that time transformed the Army to allow us to succeed during World War II. And then when I came in the Army, 1981, in fact, the graduation speaker at my graduation was President Ronald Reagan. He'd just been shot 2 months before. And, he introduced the concept of peace through strength. And that really struck me at that time, was as we were coming out of Vietnam. It was a challenging time in the country. It was a challenging time in the force. And he gave us a way ahead where we were able to transform the Army from the way we fought, from the way the organizations that we developed. I mean, if you take a look at today when it comes to counterterrorism, hostage rescue, our Ranger battalions, our Special Ops Aviation, our Special Missions, they all came out of Desert One in Iran, and the world's greatest forces right now. We built these combat training centers that our soldiers were able to get really great training at the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness Training Center, and over in Europe. And we came forward with what we call the Big Five. It was the Abrams tank, it was the Bradley, it was the Apache helicopter, it was the Black Hawk and the Patriots, and we had other systems too. But we ran out of fingers on our hands, so there's only the Big Five. But I would say most importantly, we went to the all-volunteer force. And because of that, we have what many would argue is the world's greatest non-commissioned officer corps. And that is, the people is what I think makes our Army great. So so that's been 40 years. And what we've been doing is incrementally improving our systems. We add letters to them. The Abrams tank that we have today is nothing like the M1 tank that we had 40 years ago. But as we incrementally improved our helicopters, the Apache is nothing, it looks a lot the same, but it's not the same helicopter we had 40 years ago. But we're at a point right now where we need to transform again. And we need to transform because we're in an era of great power competition. And like I like to say, great power competition does not mean great power conflict. And it won't mean it as long as we're strong. And it goes back to Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. So in the Army, we're transforming the Army. We're developing a new way we're going to fight, which is nested inside the Joint Force, which is a joint all-domain operations concept. We have a multi-domain operations concept where we'll be contested in every single domain. We're building new organizations, the multi-domain task force, our security force assistance brigades. We're taking a look at how we deal with the information space, which is something that we're really concerned about. Where before we were building training centers where we basically trained in the dirt. Now we're in the information age, so we're building cyber ranges. We're training in a synthetic training environment. We're using virtual reality and augmented reality to train our troops, and we're getting new. We got 6 modernization priorities. We got 31 plus 3 programs that we're going to use. That's going to give us the weapon systems that we need. And finally, we're moving from an industrial age personnel management system where we treat everyone as interchangeable parts into a 21st century talent management system where we manage by individual knowledge, skills, and behavior, which allows us to get the right person, the right job. We think this is absolutely critical for the future.
Well, you have a lot on your plate. That's good. Let's break that down into some context, maybe regionally, and I want to ask you about some of those weapons. Again, this is the summer after COVID, and so there's a lot of reporting and crystal ball reading to try to figure out what's going to be the budget after all of this. Is there going to be some dividend to pay? Can the military sustain the level that it's at? We've already seen several proposals and lawmakers to cut, up to I think 70 billion from the budget. You mentioned some of those priorities. Let me ask you about one, which is long range strike, which I know is kind of one of these things that we started to hear a lot more of on the ground, especially in the later years in Afghanistan and in Syria and the ISIS war. But now we're talking into the future of higher intensity, possibly conflict with China, possibly conflict with Russia. And the Army's role in long-range strike is known, but now you're talking subsonic and supersonic, whereas the Air Force may have hypersonic. So tell us why it's important to have ground-based fires like this, and more importantly, interesting to me is where will the U.S. put them? I mean, we're in the post-INF era. There is no treaty, restricting some missiles with Russia. China's not a part of it. The U.S. would like it to be a part of it, but a lot of talk. You said we're going into the cyber age. Another frame that I keep hearing is we're going into the missile age. So give us your thoughts on that.
Well, let me give you thoughts. First of all, long-range precision fires is our number one priority, and it changes. We've spent the last 20 years doing what we would call irregular warfare, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency type operations. And the characteristics of those conflicts don't really lead you to a whole bunch of long-range precision fires. It's a much more precise surgical type capability. But as we start to take a look at great power competition, again, I want to come back. Great power competition. No one wants great power conflict. And the last thing anyone wants is great power war. And the way we need to do that is we need to be able to deter our competitors. And that really comes down to speed and scale. So, we want to be able to operate in the depth of the competitive space. And so when you take a look at what are we doing? Well, at the tactical level, we're taking our cannon artillery and extending those ranges significantly. At the operational level, we have a precision strike missile capability that's operated very, very well. That's going to give us a mid-range capability that can destroy ground targets right now, and also ships in the near future. And then we have a mid-range capability, and we have a hypersonics capability that we've tested very successfully. And it's really what we want to do is provide arrows in the quiver that give us the capability, if required, to penetrate possibly some type of anti-access aerial denial capability that'll allow us to do other things that we may need to do in a contested domain environment. And so that's why this long-range precision fires is so important.
But isn't the problem or the criticism about something like that is one of scale, right? And I've heard that a lot in several different areas in this transition from the Mideast counterterrorism precision type of wars that you just described, with the idea of any kind of conflict, much less full-blown war between the United States and a China or Russia or anybody, is going to be at such a bigger level that, are we even in the ballpark of the level of capabilities that the U.S. military would need at that moment, not something to build up to?
Well, I think what all the services are doing is taking a look at the capabilities and capacities that they think they need for the future, and we want to maintain that overmatch. And by developing these systems, it's just not new equipment. It's also a new concept of how we're going to compete and how we're going to resolve conflict. And if we required to go to conflict, how we will fight in the future. They all kind of come together.
Let me let's kind of do a little geography here on not just great power, but around the globe. On Europe. So right now, the president has announced, and wants to pull forces from Europe. The Pentagon, Secretary Esper has given numbers on that. The Pentagon first said it was strategic and part of a bigger plan. The president basically said, well, he wants to get back at Merkel in Germany and force the Europeans. It's yet another way to try to force the Europeans to spend more, build more, do more for their own security. So I'd like to ask you if you could give us kind of a lot of this is, since so much of this is really an army withdrawal. What is the status of the withdrawal, and talk about, the difference. It's not just the numbers of troops. You and I know that, but maybe more for our audience, it's about those capabilities. So do you have concerns of Europe's ability to defend its interests, which, by theory are American interests as well, with that smaller force, but perhaps because of these new technologies you're talking about?
Well, what we're doing is working very closely with our partners, with the command in Europe, and we're in the process of planning, and that's going to take a while. And then, the actual moves will, I think there was one senator said it's going to, the plan is going to take months, and the move's going to take, maybe years. But what we're doing is reposturing our force, so we're in a better position to support our strategic objectives. And I can envision possibly new organizations and how we calibrate our posture. And the other thing that when we take a look at our allies and partners, we've come out with an engagement strategy that we are working very closely, in that there's things that we can do to get everyone in, to be a integral member of the competition that we're seeing. And some of the things that we've discussed and we've found with allies and partners work very good is we're ramping up our capability for international military education and training. So we find that when leaders go to our schools, they understand what we're trying to do, and it really helps us get them into the future of how we're going to fight.
Yeah,
we're not into.
Sorry to interrupt, but I don't think anyone's questioning whether or not you need to convince foreign military leaders the importance of the military power. It's about the foreign capitals or the American volunteer to support some level of defense for Europe that either the U.S. is going to support or not support.
Yeah, but I think what at least I'm trying to finish it, because there's more. It's just not about education and training. It's really bringing together a whole bunch of different capabilities. And what I mean by that is, like, the second thing is, our equipment, having them, some of our partners and allies in Europe are using old Russian equipment. Having them use our equipment is very helpful for interoperability. We've set up a new organization called Security Force Assistance Brigades, which work very, very closely with our allies and partners. They're very highly thought of, and we help increase their capabilities and capacity, along with our special forces and our National Guard, who work very closely with some of these countries. And then it's the combined exercises. It's coming up with new type of organizations, our multi-domain task forces that do long-range precision effects and long-range precision fires. And then this concept of convergence that we're starting to discuss, that we're kind of rolling out right now, that gets after the speed and scale that you and I talked about, and has 5 core elements of people, weapons, command and control, information, and terrain. And this is what we're trying to bring together to provide the best military capabilities that we can provide working with allies and partners. And that's just not in Europe. That's the same thing in the Pacific.
As we go toward the questioning side, I'll say there's a lot of questions that are Asia and China focused. I'll skip my own and save them for our viewers. I'll ask you one more here in Europe, and then maybe a Mideast one before we jump over there. And sure. In Europe, it's that, Russia's been busy lately. On the ground, confrontation with Americans in Syria, in the air, within 100 feet of a B-52, flying into NATO airspace. The high level news headline stories are about the president not wanting to confront or call out Russia. What I'm curious, what are the relations at the military or intelligence level, at your level? Are you calling out Russia? Are the Joint Chiefs? Are others doing it? Is that helpful? What's the status of how is the United States responding to all this? Maybe at a level that we haven't heard.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's in the news. So the chairman has talked to his counterpart and made it very, very clear about the concerns that he has about these interactions, and we are very, very concerned at our level also. But that is being handled above my level.
What can be done other than be concerned to stop that or confront them or get in a better position?
Well, I think as we take a look, first of all, we want to make sure it's as we take a look, is it a policy or is it we want to make sure we understand what has actually happened. Is this an intentional move to impact our forces, or is it just a platoon that's in the wrong place, right time? And we need to work through those issues, and those are being worked above our level.
What do you think? What's your hunch?
Well, I think we should make sure we confront them when these things happen and find out what was the intent behind the confrontation. We have a sacred obligation to protect our troops, and at least I believe that way. And they are. It's very, very dangerous when you have armed troops who have the right to self-defense. To go ahead and they are doing the right thing. You risk the possible escalation, and I don't think anyone would want that.
Let's shift over to the MENA, Middle East and Africa, where Americans may not realize it, but there's still quite a lot of conflict and activity and actions going on. I keep seeing sporadic notices from CENTCOM and AFRICOM about drone strikes, skirmishes, conflicts, troops getting injured, terrorists being killed. I think back to when AFRICOM was started, and wasn't that long ago, and the idea of militarization of Africa, it was almost like a third rail. Now it seems to be on the table that a whole CENTCOM, the whole reorganization of the combatant commands, has included what to do with AFRICOM's headquarters, and how much activity the United States is involved across the continent. Can you tell us how many countries or how widespread is the Army's presence in Africa right now?
Well, the Army does not have a large presence in Africa. It does do security force and assistance type missions. It does do partnership missions. The intent of General Townsend, who's the AFRICOM commander, is to see how he can increase the capabilities and the capacity of those countries that have a security threat, and that's working also with our other allies and partners like the French and some of the other countries that are in the region.
Well, think to the future. Where do you see the United States heading? There's its military or the Army specifically in Africa. I know there's a lot of special forces and special operations forces activity, especially out of Djibouti. But then there's also, like you're saying, the building partner capacity, which the United States does everywhere, but is doing a lot more in Africa. Do you see that need rising? That the United States getting more and more invested militarily in Africa? Is it an upward trend still?
Well, I wouldn't say it's an upward trend. I think the trend is going to be based on what the administration and the senior policymakers see as the strategic threat. And again, when we look at the United States military and the United States Army, we'd much rather build a country's capacity and capabilities to deal with the problems that they have in the country than actually having our soldiers do that. It works much, much better if the country that's involved takes on the problem sets, and we're in a much more of a support role.
All right, thanks. I'm going to turn to some of our viewer questions that have come in. So I'm reading, if you forgive me from looking to the side, reading on my chat bar. We have one from, let's see, Dong-hyun Kim, a reporter from Voice of America in Korea. And the question is on Army's future posture. She's reading from an Army War College report. about the Army's posture in the Indo-Pacific. And the takeaway is that the current Army posture in the region is too much focus on the crisis in the Korean Peninsula and must shift more toward China. The question is, how do you assess this policy recommendation from this Army, I guess it's a War College report? Interesting question. Is the Army too focused on Korea still and not yet shifting enough toward China?
No, I think that we understand the national defense strategy, which views China in a great power competition role. We see the South China Sea, which is a lot of concern about what's going on there. We talk to a lot of our counterparts. I was over in Asia in July, and met with our Thailand, Singapore, and Japanese counterparts. And again, we regularly talk to, at least I do, the chiefs of staffs in the region, and we're looking for opportunities to partner with them. We all support a free and open Indo-Pacific, and that is something we think is very, very important for global security. So we are working in that way. We certainly don't want to have any type of conflict, but at the same time, we recognize the importance and share the interests of having a free and open Indo-Pacific.
We're under 10 minutes, just for your awareness. Next question, Jack Curtis. Any thoughts or comments on China undertaking a significant nuclear buildup, which will double the size of its arsenal by 2030, if that's the right year? I forget. For those at home, the Pentagon's annual China report just came out, the China Power Report, and that was one of the headlines out of its, that the Pentagon identified itself was China undertaking a big buildup, including doubling its warheads. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we have a very robust capability in the United States, and we're certainly concerned about what China is doing, what is their intent, what's their impact, and I think that's why it's very, very important that we compete. And again, competition does not mean conflict, and we certainly don't want to have any type of great power conflict with either Russia or China. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be ready to deter that type of conflict, but we certainly don't want that to happen.
Another question is, we'll stick with China. It's similar, but it says Chinese are pursuing a blue water navy. Can Army missile defense be an effective defense against that PLA navy? A little complicated for maybe if you're not familiar with all this, but this is you mentioned this earlier area, anti-access area denial, the potential of missile wars of the future. What's the role, or does the Army? I guess the question is, can the Army's missile defense be an effective defense against the Navy?
Well, I think what's important is, as we've looked at some of our competitors, they've established what we call anti-access area denial capabilities, and it basically, in some cases, can put our ships at risk, or some of our air forces at risk when you have an integrated air and missile defense capability. And there's nothing that says we can't do the same. And so as we develop these capabilities, and we have some already, we just want to provide options to a combatant commanders that present really multiple dilemmas to our to our competitors. And I think that's how we deter and that's how we maintain peace and stability in these regions.
Transition nicely to on the missile topic. Tom Carrico from CSIS, who is on our follow-on panel later, so stay tuned to hear more from him. But he writes in, General McConville, you mentioned it's not just about new equipment. How do you think about the Army acquiring and deploying off-the-shelf Navy missiles like the Tomahawk? The Marines seem to be doing that.
Yeah, I think we are working that. So SM-6s and Tomahawks, I mean, that's a capability that I can see us is having in the future. The Marine Corps is doing the same thing. We're working very, very closely. If you don't have to develop your own system, you already have something that works or is pretty close to working, then I think that's in all of our interests to go ahead and pursue those. And I think there's value in getting after those type things.
All right. Next question on exercises. Apparently, it says the joint exercise U.S. South Korea was completed recently, if that's correct. How do you assess that exercise? When do you expect to have the next ones? I had to add to that, is there any talk of reforming the large-scale ones that were shut down a few years back during the nuclear or the talks with the Koreans? And if you could also then jump over to the other side, Defender 2020 in Europe, it was supposed to be the largest in however many years, full-scale division deployment. Didn't happen because of COVID. Sounds like maybe a smaller version may happen again, but the inability to run that exercise has a lot of implications. So first the Korea one, and then over to Europe.
Yeah, I'll tie them together because they kind of, in some ways, as COVID emerged, and quite frankly, it emerged in Korea, and we learned a lot. General Abrams and his team, really gave us some great insights on how to battle this invisible enemy. And some of it was you just had to stop doing some of the things that you wanted to do, and then you had to put special procedures in place. And as we looked at Defender 2020, it was starting to happen right as COVID was coming into place. We had forces in Italy. Italy was hit pretty hard. And so, the decision, we made a decision, the Secretary and I, as we took a look at in coordination with the Secretary of Defense and SACEUR, was, the way these exercises are, we'd be bringing tens of thousands of troops into large vest tents and all those type of things. And we were just so concerned that we would have a huge COVID problem and it could turn into a quarantine-X and not the exercise that we wanted to do. So we went ahead and curtailed Defender 2020. We still did some. In fact, we just had a unit go in and work with the Poles. And what we've done as an Army is we took a look at what the CDC was telling us. What were the procedures that we should put in place? And, we stopped or paused some of the things, but, at least I like to say, we can't telecommute to combat. So we had to, start initial military training. We're doing full up on initial military training with very precise procedures in place. West Point has stood up. Kids are going back. We have in fact, we won the football game this weekend. But very rigid procedures in place so we can protect the force. So all those things are going on. And as far as in Korea and the Pacific and Europe, we want to get back to these larger exercises where we work with our partners. We think those are very, very important. But COVID's introduced a kind of a new fog and friction that just makes these exercises a little more difficult. We're still doing them, not to the level. And when we do them, we're putting very strict procedures in place so we can protect the force.
All right. I think we'll get one more for the chat before I close out. An interesting one. Peter Lowe says, General, are you aware of the spread of QAnon followers in the Army? Do you have policies to affect the work of this in the Army? Does it erode the trust you already mentioned? So it's a question about QAnon, the big conspiracy theory, movements out there. I know. I reported on extremism in the ranks over the years, but this is a real big specific one. Is that coming across your desk?
Yeah, where I'm at is, I talked a little about things that hurt our soldiers and things that break trust. I think any type of racism or extremism in the United States Army needs to be totally eliminated. We can't have those type of things. We have people that are looking out that's one of my top three personnel type issues that we want to get after. And what I mean by that, racism and extremism, we just cannot have that in the United States Army. There's no room for that. It breaks down cohesion in our Army. And any type of extremism, any type of racism, any type of people that aren't willing to treat their fellow soldiers with dignity and respect and not willing to take care of each other cannot serve in our Army.
General, I think we're down to our last minute or two. So in a closing comment or remark, I would just ask, the country's heading into the election. The military has been invoked, already all this summer in our politics in a way that was, just unprecedented, really, in my 20 years covering it. What do you have to say to the American people to help? I don't want to lead you, but instill faith in what you're trying to do. That faith you mentioned at the beginning of our interview.
Yeah. Well, I just want to, thank the American people for their support. This has been a very challenging time for the country. COVID has people out of work. It has a lot of concerns with the social injustice that's going on in the country. Yet young men and women continue to raise their right hands and serve during a very difficult time. We have great power competition going on. We are concerned about what China's doing. We're concerned about Russia's doing. We're concerned about what Iran's doing. We're concerned about North Korea, what they are doing. We're also concerned about these violent extremists that are going on. We're concerned about wildfires that are happening out west. We're concerned about the hurricane season coming through. We're still concerned about COVID that's happening, and we are concerned about the social rest and the things that are breaking this country down. And quite frankly, we want to see, we are going to work very closely with the American people to do what we do, and that's to protect the nation. And I'm very, very proud of the young men and women that continue to serve during this time frame. And I think we should all be very proud of them, because I certainly am.
General, that'll be the final word. Look, thank you very much for your time this morning, for speaking through Defense One to our audience at a pretty critical moment, and for kicking off our State of Defense series. So I will, a couple closing remarks. For those watching, stay tuned for a word from our underwriter, Sarah Katz, CEO of Oracle, followed by our next panel of experts about the future of the Army. Real quickly, that's retired Lieutenant General Karen Gibson, the former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, the former J2 Director of Intelligence at CENTCOM and CJF OIR, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, fan of everyone's, I think, over at former Commander, U.S. Army Europe, also a Florida State football fan. I think we'll hear a lot about that maybe too. And Tom Carrico, the Director of the Missile Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. General McConville, Chief of Staff, U.S. Army, thank you very much, sir.
And thank you, Kevin. Appreciate the time.
All right. Good.